For more, let's bring in UK correspondent Jonathan Sacerdoti in London and senior Washington DC correspondent Dan Raviv. Jonathan, we'll start with you. Now, Trump isn't expected to receive a warm welcome in the UK. I understand the police are planning the biggest mobilisation of officers since the 2011 riots in preparation for thousands of people expected to protest his arrival.
Yes, Tracy, thousands of officers will be moving across the country to police those demonstrations against Donald Trump. But that's something he's probably used to even at home. He arrives on Thursday and he'll visit London, Windsor, Blenheim Palace and Scotland. Most people have noted that he's probably steering clear of areas of London predominantly and places where he might encounter those protests, perhaps for fear of him being embarrassed. Firearms officers, armed counter-terrorism units, public order officers, dog handlers, all of these will be deployed in order to protect his visit. But I think it's wrong to say that it won't be a warm welcome. While there are those protesters, they are of course a minority, however big the protests will be. The country is definitely rolling out the red carpet. He's meeting the Queen. He's going to an important dinner at Blenheim Palace with business leaders. He's meeting Theresa May in her country home in Chequers. I think from the official welcome, it will be a very warm welcome for Mr. Trump, and perhaps the number of police being deployed is testament to just how welcome they want him to feel so that he'll be protected from those protesters.
Good point. Dan, we'll bring you in. Now, despite these protests, as Jonathan points to, and that narrative, I suppose, that Trump doesn't particularly like May, does that actually translate on a governmental level? How is the special US-UK relationship tracking?
Well, as I've spoken to U.S. government officials about nearly every part of foreign policy and asked the question, Donald Trump's tweets, Donald Trump's attitudes, his new policies, his desire to be the opposite of Barack Obama, does that affect your work? Every U.S. official says, of course it does. The president is the man at the top. He is setting the tone. And so if today, for instance, he's talking warmly about Boris Johnson, who is clearly a challenger to Prime Minister Theresa May within the British Conservative Party, that sure sounds like Trump taking sides. More broadly, I mean, how's the relationship? Sure, Trump would love to have a one-to-one trade agreement just with Britain as Britain gets out of the European Union. But we know that Brexit has not been fully negotiated, to be charitable. And so we don't know what the fate is of U.S.-UK trade discussions. And Trump, of course, plans to drive a hard bargain because that's what he does. Tracy.
All right, Jonathan, what do you say to that? Of course, we saw those tussles earlier and Dan's points there, but there have been those big, bold gestures between the two countries.
Yes, and listen, we can talk about how he mentioned Boris Johnson, but I think that's probably because he does know Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is something of a clown or buffoon of British politics, and so you might say that there is something in common, in style at least, with Donald Trump. He also said in the same comments to reporters that he knows Theresa May very, very well, and they have a very good relationship. So I don't think it's a case of him taking sides per se. It's just him not being very diplomatic. And as you say, there have been bold gestures, and there's been close cooperation in real times. Britain joined France and America in those airstrikes on Syria with very little hesitation. Donald Trump moved the bust of Churchill into his office on day one as a symbolic gesture. Theresa May went to visit Donald Trump as one of the first, if not the first, foreign heads of state, foreign prime ministers rather, to come and visit him when he became the president, even though that was slightly unpopular. And Donald Trump reacted to the first Novichok poisoning back in March in Salisbury by expelling a record number of Russian diplomats from the United States in accordance with Mrs. May and the UK's will. So I think despite these faux pas, let's say, and these foot-in-mouth moments where Donald Trump is less than diplomatic, we can say that the special relationship is still pretty strong.
All right, just to touch on Dan's earlier point, just to you, Jonathan, Britain's exit from the European Union means it could be more reliant than ever on the United States, especially economically, just as Dan pointed to. So what will May be looking to advance through Trump's visit?
Well, for Theresa May, every meeting with any foreign government or foreign official will be about Brexit in one part or another. She's certainly going through a lot of problems at home in relation to Brexit and in relation to keeping power. But she will be looking to talk to Donald Trump about strengthening trade relations so that when Britain finally does get out of the European Union, it will be able to strike a very good deal with America. This will be key in making a success of Brexit, as she puts it. And she's not really making a success of those negotiations or selling them to the country or even her own government at the moment.
All right, Dan, just briefly to you, how much do the US and the UK need each other right now?
Well, I'm not going to say that the United States needs Great Britain. I mean, from a Trumpian point of view, I think, of course, the United States needs its allies. It has spent decades since World War II developing these alliances. Trump discounts them like they're not that important, and he demands, of course, that NATO alliance members pay a lot more for Europe's defense. That's the really big issue. He and Melania Trump arrived in Brussels just minutes ago. In Brussels, Belgium, tomorrow, and most of Thursday. That's the big job for Donald Trump, to squeeze other NATO members to pay more for Europe's defense. We'll see how that goes. Then he gets to Britain, Tracy.
Right, we'll be watching that closely. Jonathan Sacerdoti, Dan Raviv, appreciate that insight from Washington, D.C. and from London there.